Concentric only exercise can be as easy as a walk in the park, challenging enough to humble an elite athlete, and holds potential for healing that nagging pain throughout your body. Before we go any further, let's make sure we understand some basic terminology here, right? We can't know what concentric only exercise is if we don't even know what the word concentric means, okay? So let me break this down for you. When it comes to muscle physiology, right, we have three basic types of contractions that are available. We can do a concentric contraction, an eccentric contraction, and an isometric contraction. Most of the stuff that we see in the gym, right, whether it's a bicep curl, a tricep extension, bench press, deadlift, squat, you name it, list goes on. Most of those exercises, whether you realize it or not, there is a concentric portion and an eccentric portion. You don't see a whole lot of isometric work going on unless you're watching like gymnastics, right? But we'll get into that in a second. So I want to give you a couple examples and I'll show you where the concentric and eccentric and isometric portions are of these exercises. And then we're going to do an example together. And then I'm going to give you one and I'm going to let you do on your own and see if you can pick it up, right? Figure this out. And then after that, then we'll go into what concentric only exercise is and we'll pick it up from there, okay? So let's start with the bicep curl here, okay? So real simple exercise, it's real visual. So right now, right, I'm in this bottom position, okay? Now, as I bring the weight up, I curl or lift, contract the weight up, you can literally see the bicep shortening or balling up, right? This is a concentric contraction. It means the muscle is contracting and it's shortening. The muscle is shortening as it's contracting, right? Concentric contraction. Now, as I descend, right, and I lower the weight, once again, this is a nice visual, you can literally see the bicep lengthening or stretching, getting longer, right? Now, it has to be under control, right? If I was to come up here and then just let the weight, take me down, well, that wouldn't be much of a contraction, right? I think you understand the point. So concentric, the muscle is shortening. Eccentric, meaning that the muscle is lengthening, okay? Now, suppose I added like a pause somewhere. Maybe here, it'll make the most sense. This is the hardest position of the exercise. So maybe I add an isometric contraction here. That means you're contracting the muscle just hard enough that it's neither shortening nor lengthening. The joint angle doesn't change. It stays relatively the same. Now, where you see this the most would be like maybe gymnastics, right? They have to hold the iron cross position or whatever position it is, and they have to hold it for a certain amount of time in order for that execution of that move to count during competition, right? So there's concentric, eccentric, and isometric, okay? So let me do another example for you. Let's say that we are doing a push-up, right? Same idea here, okay? So right here, I'm in the top position. Now, as I lower myself down, right, I descend down, you can see that my shoulders, my triceps, right, and my chest are lengthening eccentrically. They're stretched. Now, as I contract, come up, right, the shoulders, the triceps, and the chest have shortened a little bit, right? That was the concentric portion. So here's the eccentric again, right? I'm lowering, shoulders, triceps, chest are stretching, eccentric contraction, right? And then there's the concentric portion there. Chest, shoulders, triceps are all shortening. Now, just like within the curl, right? Maybe I add a pause right here. I'm trying to get good in this mid position. That would be an isometric contraction. I'm not shortening, I'm not lowering, I'm staying in position, right? That's an isometric contraction. All right, so I gave you two examples to see. Now let's do one together. What about, say, reverse squats, all right? Reverse squats. Where would the concentric portion be, the eccentric portion, and the isometric, if it's even there? Now, if you said, as you were watching that the concentric portion was, right, as I was bringing my knees up to my elbows, you're correct, right? The hips and the abs are shortening, right? To bring the knees up to those elbows. Now, where's the eccentric portion? If you said it was while my knees were coming down, right? That's correct, right? The hips and the abs to a degree are lengthening. They're coming back into that more neutral, semi-stretched position, right? That was the eccentric portion of the exercise. Now, in that little demo, there was no isometric. I didn't add any holds. So like I was mentioning earlier, most of the time, we just go through the concentric and eccentric. But we'll do a whole nother video on isometrics and the potential benefits of that as well. Last example here. Now it's your turn, okay? So I did a couple examples. We did one together with those reverse squats. But now I want to do one last one. I want to see if you're starting to pick this up, if you can figure this out now. What about, say, tibialis raise, right, with the tib bar? Where's the concentric portion? Where's the eccentric portion? And in this demo, is there an isometric portion? All right, now that we have a little bit of context, we're starting to understand our terminology, the differences between concentric, isometric, and eccentric contractions. Now we have that one final term. What does it mean for an exercise to be concentric only? Well, if you think about just even the way that's phrased, it means that the exercise essentially only has the concentric portion of the exercise, right? Now in this, let's pretend it's a heavy barbell, right? So as I'm lowering down, yes, I have to contract my hamstrings and my glutes just enough to control my body weight, but there's virtually no resistance here, right? But again, pretending this is a heavy barbell, right? As I pick it up, I'm shortening in the hamstrings and the glutes, right? But if I drop it at the top, now I'm only really stressing the concentric portion of the exercise. So for all intents and purposes, we could call something like that a concentric only deadlift, right? Now, let's do one together. So what about these two here? You have an RDL and a row machine. Which one of those is concentric only? Now, if you said the row machine, you're correct, right? Now, I don't know if you've ever used a row machine yourself, but in the row machine, unlike the RDL, right? The RDL pulls you into this position. Your hips, right? Your hip flexors are not contracting. The weight is pulling you down eccentrically, right? So your glutes and your hamstrings and your back are all controlling this eccentric contraction, right? But in the row machine, you're pulling yourself into that position, and the only real contraction is when you're coming out, right? So the only real resistance on the row machine is while you're concentrically contracting. But again, the RDL, there's that eccentric and concentric portion, right? Now, what about these three? Let's see if you can figure that one out on your own. All right, so now that we understand all of our terminology, let's talk about how concentric only exercise can actually hold potential for healing some painful areas in your body. Let me give you an example of how this could work, particularly for the knees, right? So let's say somebody's got a lot of knee pain, jumper's knee, right? Maybe playing a lot of basketball, something like that. Usually in this case, people like that, right? They want, if they can't even really get into a squat, right? A squat, this eccentric portion hurts, right? Now we know from the literature that eccentric contractions are much more associated with micro damage to the muscles and the connective tissue. And it's a lot more associated also with soreness. So with somebody who's already got compromised joints, and in this case, the knees, you ask them to do squats, jumps where there's all that force, right, as you're coming down on the landing. Sometimes even just walking down steps can be painful. So then it starts this whole vicious cycle, right? You can't even exercise. The connective tissue, the muscles get weaker and weaker, and now you can't do anything, you're depressed, right? But with concentric only exercise, we eliminate the stress from the eccentric portion altogether, right? So in the case of a sled, for example, right? As you bring that knee back, right, there's no eccentric load, only the concentric portion as you're pushing back on that sled. So now for the person who has tremendous knee pain, they now have an access point to start working directly, right, this whole area and getting these muscles working, getting a ridiculous amount of blood flow to the area, but in a gentle way that can start to rebuild those muscles and the connective tissue to be able to handle even greater forces into the future. So the sled, as you can see, is a foundational exercise that already thousands of people have used to help rebuild that pain-free ability in really wrecked knees, right? Okay, so now we've talked about, building back some pain-free ability, but then, you don't want to just leave it there. You want to get stronger than you were before you even got injured, right? So many times in rehab, we talk about bringing back the ability that you had, former strength, but no, you want to go beyond that. This is where the idea of bulletproofing comes in, right? So you build that pain-free ability back, but then you can continue to challenge yourself as much as you want, whether it's adding weight to the sled, timing yourself for speed and endurance trials, things like that. You can just keep getting stronger, so you build like what we might call a bulletproof reserve, meaning that you have an even greater ability to absorb and resist the forces that initially caused you that injury in the first place. So you're even more resilient than you were than when you got injured in the first place. So we've talked about a bulletproof reserve, right? Now let's get to that real juicy stuff. What about that elite ability that I was talking about? Well, sometimes the research is a little bit behind what people are practicing and observing. So I'll admit there's no peer-reviewed journals on this, but I digress. Let me just give you two testimonials, just two, and there's a lot of them out there, testimonials of people who have used this very exercise, particularly the sled, to help them build definitely what I would call elite ability. Let's take Jake Horst, for example. Now, Jake Horst is a weightlifter over at Garage Strength. Now, in his own words, and you can look this up on YouTube, there was a period of time where he had unbearable knee pain, right? And he started using the sled. It wasn't the only thing he used, but he said that the sled was the #1 exercise that helped him eliminate his knee pain and save his athletic career, right? Now, there's some big claims. He went on to compete in the World Championships for Team USA. Another guy, Ben Patrick, AKA the knees over toes guy. Now, he's got his own story. He's practically a household name. You probably already know his story, but in case you don't, right? He was basically, one of the weakest, most fragile, slowest people on his team, basketball in college, to now being, again, practically a household name, for building some of the most strongest bulletproof knees in the world, probably. I mean, the guy went from, I think it was ballpark around like 19-inch vertical to now like 42. So if I'm wrong, somebody correct me on that, but it's somewhere in that ballpark. Now, last time I checked, the average vertical jump height in the NBA is about 28 inches. Last time I checked. So a 42-inch vertical going from 19 to 42, that's pretty impressive. So again, whether you're using the sled, swimming, the elliptical, the row machine, a bike, concentric-only exercise is an excellent starting place to get into fitness if you've been out of it for a while and you don't want to get, crazy sore, but you want to get some good conditioning. And then, as we mentioned, the sled potentially might even have some extra benefits, as we've seen, of helping people eliminate their knee pain. Now, could swimming and some of these other concentric-only exercises also be able to unlock some pain-free ability? Don't know. I just know that the anecdotal stories lie very heavily with the sled. Although, one of my favorite all-time health and fitness people, the late Jack LaLanne, I know that swimming was a huge thing for him. And he lived up to be, I think, don't quote me, I think it was like late 80s, early 90s. He lived to be pretty darn old, and he was in amazing, amazing shape. So again, choose which one, but get started, right? The sled might even help you unlock some elite abilities, who knows? But hey, you have the knowledge. Now what are you gonna do with it?